Red Bull team principal Christian Horner just dropped even worse news for his drivers and has insisted the biggest challenge for Formula One's reigning constructors champions at the upcoming Brazilian Grand Prix weekend will be to match McLaren's end-of-stint pace. But not only that, as Verstappen will be trying to do this with a grid penalty. Will he even come close? And what kind of bad news did the Red Bull team principal further have for his drivers? Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have routinely outperformed competitors during tyre stints in recent races, frequently holding back and conserving their tyres before going on the attack late in the race. That became clear again as Norris chased down Charles Leclerc's Ferrari for second place in Mexico last weekend, reducing Max Verstappen's lead in the Drivers' Championship battle. The Dutchman complained about his tyres throughout both the medium and hard stints, citing a lack of grip as the reason for his failure to rebound to the top 5 following a pair of 10-second penalties. When suggested to him that the race pace was again lacking compared to the one-lap qualifying effort that saw Verstappen take second on the grid, Horner replied, "I think that is the biggest thing that we need to take away from here. More so on the hard tyre, we just didn't have the same pace. Max had no grip, we didn't feel we could switch the tyres on. So that's the biggest challenge in the next 4 days, to understand what caused that." Obviously, Brazil is a very different challenge to this circuit, but it's a pattern that, particularly at the end of stints, you see the McLaren is very strong, particularly at the end of Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz's triumph and Leclerc's third place to follow up on the 1-2 result in Austin, as well as Sergio Perez's poor form, mean that Red Bull has been surpassed by the Scuderia into second place in the Constructors' Championship. Asked how he saw the battle for the team's title shaping up, Horner conceded, "I think it will be very difficult. We never give up. We'll fight very hard. We need both cars, obviously, scoring." Ferrari had another big score here, and as far as the Constructors is concerned, we're certainly on the back foot. But that isn't all the bad news for Verstappen and Red Bull, as Verstappen's dreams of returning to the lead in this weekend's race in Brazil have been crushed as the Red Bull driver will be forced to serve a grid penalty. Following engine difficulties during last weekend's Mexico City GP, Red Bull will have to add a new Honda power unit to Verstappen's RB20. This engine is outside of the yearly limit, resulting in an immediate grid penalty. Red Bull advisor Helmut Marko highlighted that the engine troubles from last Friday had a cumulative effect on Verstappen's car's performance all weekend. Verstappen's Mexico weekend got off to a bad start on Friday with a leak in the engine's intake tract, according to Marko. As a result, Max was unable to drive in both the first and second practice sessions. The lack of driving time is part of the reason why we were not competitive in the race, especially with the hard tyres. We had the 5th fastest car behind the 2 Ferraris and the McLaren. On the medium Pirelli we were still halfway there, but with both compounds the tyre wear was worse than that of our competitors. The pace was also not good, because due to the aforementioned engine problem, a different power unit had to be fitted that had reached the end of its cycle and was not actually planned for racing at all. That was one of the reasons why we were one of the slowest cars on the straights. When a Formula One engine has reached a certain number of kilometers, the loss of power is clearly noticeable. We are currently investigating whether we could use the engine with the leak again. But here, too, the mileage means that it is no longer intended to be used. All this means that we cannot avoid changing the engine in Brazil with a corresponding penalty. The exact magnitude of Verstappen's punishment has yet to be determined, since it depends on the number of components required. Verstappen has already served a 10-place grid penalty owing to the installation of a new power unit at the Belgian Grand Prix, and another internal combustion engine will result in a 5-place grid penalty. Verstappen has already used up all 4 allotted turbochargers, MGU-H and MGU-K, as well as 2 energy stores and control electronics. If he uses a new component from any of them, he will receive an additional 10-place penalty. And if that wasn't enough trouble for Red Bull, Christian Horner has stated that his crew has done all possible to help a struggling Sergio Perez following a horrific home weekend in Mexico. And this time, it might result in Checo being without a drive after this weekend. Perez was eliminated in Q1, received a time penalty for parking forward of his grid slot, and then lost more ground after he clashed with RB's aggressive Liam Lawson in Turn 5, causing floor damage. After admitting to having a terrible season, Perez's disastrous weekend has put even more pressure on the 34-year-old to step up, as well as pressure on Red Bull to evaluate its choices for 2025 after falling to third position in the Constructors' Championship. When pressed on the Mexican's future, Horner said, "Checo, again, has had a horrible weekend. Nothing has gone right for him this weekend. He knows Formula One is a results-based business, and inevitably, when you're not delivering, the spotlight is firmly on you. There is always going to be scrutiny on that. As a team, we need to have both cars scoring points, and that is the nature of Formula One." When asked if the examination extended until 2025, or if Red Bull might make a change sooner, Horner said Perez will be in the car in Brazil, but didn't provide much comfort beyond the next Sao Paulo weekend. "From the team's perspective, we're working with him as hard as we can to try to support him," he told reporters. "We've done everything that we can to support Checo and will continue to do so in Brazil next weekend. But there comes a point in time that you can only do so much. There comes a point in time that difficult decisions have to be made. We're now third in the Constructors' Championship. Our determination is to try and get back into a winning position, but it's going to be a tall order over these next 4 races." Many have been shocked by the fact that Perez still has a drive, but according to paddock insider Damon Hill, it had everything to do with Perez management. As Damon Hill claims, Sergio Perez's side feels they have a watertight contract with Red Bull. Perez's future has never appeared to be secure, and despite having a contract for next year, there are serious doubts that the Mexican will be in the driver's seat for the season's first race. Another dismal performance, this time in his home race in Mexico, placed Perez on the firing line, with Red Bull reportedly prepared to fire him. But Hill, who talked with Perez's manager Julian Jacobi, claims the driver believes he is going nowhere. "I had a chat with his manager the last race I went to, and I think they feel very confident they've got a watertight contract," Hill said. "The question is, what has happened to Checo? Why is he so far off the pace? I don't get it. I don't get what he's up to. What's going on either in his head or in the garage? I don't know. Contracts are one thing, but sooner or later, there comes a point where they have to do what they have to do." Hill expressed sympathy for Perez, adding that drivers can lose form at times, and that when this happens, issues begin to arise. "It's very bad. It's very difficult," the 1996 world champion said. "I've experienced it myself. It is a very peculiar thing when you just can't seem to find the thing you're after, and it's also very difficult if you're in a team where the focus is not necessarily on sorting out your problem. It's got other, bigger fish to fry. So it does compound, and I do feel for Checo." As for who comes next, Hill said that working with Max Verstappen was challenging and questioned if Liam Lawson was ready for the next phase. "I'm sure they'd love to have someone who could back up Max in a battle. Max will not want a driver who is going to give him any grief, so you've got to weigh those two things up. Yuki Tsunoda must be wondering why he does not get the seat. The fact is that Liam has arrived back from his enforced layoff and he's shown what he can do very quickly. He's already made enemies, and one of them is the person he might replace. What do you think? Will Red Bull be able to perform in Brazil? And will they make driver changes after this weekend?